Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Kristen Donnelly, one of the good doctors of Abbey Research, and we are empathy educators who are generally obsessed with the idea that if we all knew a little bit more about each other, we might be able to get along better. And not in a Hallmark card kind of way, but in an actual let's do the work to do life in a more cohesive manner than we currently do. This series is a part of service to that. It's called Welcome to My World, and I get the privilege of chatting with somebody who is different than me, i.e. everybody, about something in their life that isn't in mine. So I can learn about it, and so can you, in the hopes, again, that because people are so complicated and different and beautiful and wonderful, that the more we learn about each other, the better we understand. So today I am joined by Kent Sanders. Kent, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Kristen. It is an absolute honor to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, I'm so excited. Kent is the founder of Inkwell Ghostwriting, which helps leaders grow their business through books and other content. We're going to talk mostly about that because I'm so curious.
Cool.
He's also the founder of the Daily Writer community and host of the Daily Writer podcast, on which I've had the privilege of being a guest, which helps writers cultivate the habits for creative success, in which I admitted that I have very few habits and just pray it works. In addition, Kent is the author of The Artist's Suitcase, 26 Essentials for the Creative Journey. He lives near St. Louis, Missouri with his wife and his son. Kent, thanks again.
Thank you.
So ghostwriting is something I think we often hear about, like celebrity memoirs more than anything else. But can you tell us a little bit about like nuts and bolts of what it actually is and how it works?
So the analogy that I like to use with ghostwriting is that it's kind of like being a midwife in a sense. Now I know midwifery. I don't even know if that's an actual term or not, but it is now.
How they say it in the UK. So it is over there. I don't know if it's over here.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And what do they call it? It's called
midwifery.
Midwifery. Okay. So I don't even have the wrong concept. I'm like mispronouncing it. So
it's a concept for sure. Yeah.
So, but that's okay. So I'm just putting myself out there. So I sort of liken it to that in the sense that the job of a ghostwriter is to bring a book safely into the world and to deliver someone's baby, as it were, safely, soundly, in a healthy way, clean it up, and you give it back to the client. So then they have this wonderful new baby to show to the world. And that can take a whole lot of different approaches depending on the client situation, how much they want to input into the process and how much the ghostwriter is doing. So it can look a lot of different ways, but the basic idea is that you're taking content or ideas from someone and you are shaping that. Many times you're writing it from scratch, or you're at least working from raw materials, and you're taking that material and then you're basically delivering a completed book, either back to the client or you're delivering it to an editor or to a publisher. It can look a lot of different ways, but that's the basic idea of it.
Okay. So many questions where I can go from there.
Okay.
So I'll pick the processy bit because that's what fascinates me the most as a writer. So sure. Is this something that is it you ask them a bunch of questions and then they answer it? Like, do you have a set formula with people, or do you kind of let us figure it out as we all kind of go?
There is a formula, but it also depends on what the client wants to do. And let me give you two different examples.
Okay.
So I'll take two books that I wrote last year for clients, and these were both kind of at the extreme from each other.
Okay.
So one client, this is a woman who's very successful in the network marketing industry, kind of in the nutrition and fitness space. And she had an absolutely compelling story of growing up in a very, very difficult situation. And then later on in life, she decided to completely turn her life around and built this amazing, like multi-six-figure business. She's like one of the hardest workers I've ever seen, and just this absolutely amazing person. She wanted to tell her story to help inspire other people that basically anything is possible in life if you set your mind to it. That was the gist of the book. That's all she had. And so when she came to me with this idea of, hey, can I turn this into a book? What we did is we sat down and we thought through all the possibilities for what that could look like, what type of a book she wanted to have, how that wanted to align with her business, or if it was even going to align with her business. And that was okay if it didn't. It really just depended on what she wanted to do with that book and what it wanted to accomplish for her. Okay. That's really the first thing that I ask is, what do you want this book to do for you? because you can construct a book any way that you want to. My goal as a ghostwriter is to figure out what are your goals and how can this book help you to achieve those goals. So the book is really like a tool to help you achieve something else. That's the way that I look at it.
Right.
So we went through that process, and then we spent a long time, really most of last summer, doing a lot of Zoom calls and interviews and really digging into what's your story, how are we going to tell this story, what are some books that you love, and how can we maybe take the voice of those books and translate that through your voice, and then really just come up with a narrative and a storyline that communicates what you want. So that was a very involved process. Now, the other end of the spectrum is another book that I did last year for a client who basically said, hey, can you do a book for me on XYZ topic? And I said, sure, I would love to. This is a person that I had sort of known from a distance, and we got to know each other a little bit last year. And he just said, I need a book on this topic. Can you do it? And we had a couple of calls throughout the process, but otherwise it was very much a book that I kind of wrote on my own, and then would check in with this person from time to time and say, is this good? Is this bad? Do you like where we're going? Yeah, it's great. That's fantastic. Then I deliver the book to him and he has it edited and so forth. So it can run the gamut of how involved is the client, and so forth. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to answer that question, but the main idea is, how much does the client want to do? How much do they want to be involved? Then I adjust my process according to that.
I love it, because I think my perception before meeting you, through our mutual friend Trisha Brook,
Yeah.
that somebody just kind of like talked into a tape recorder or into a Zoom call, sent it to you, and it was almost like you were a typist more than a ghostwriter. And I didn't even know that that was what I thought until you started explaining the process. I'm utterly fascinated by this. How did you get into ghostwriting?
It's very interesting. If you talk to ghostwriters, many times they will say things like, I just fell into ghostwriting, or I stumbled onto it by accident, which I know sounds kind of funny because you don't like really stumble into a career by accident. There's some measure
of us do. So yeah.
I mean, there's some measure of choice in there somewhere, but a lot of times we do sort of find ourselves in a career,
yeah,
whether we set out to do that or not. So this is the honest to God truth of how I got into this. So I've got a friend, his name is Nick Pavlidis, a very successful ghostwriter, and he's been doing this for a while. And I saw the success that he was having. And I've always been in the writing space. I've always been doing writing stuff, and I was like the kid in middle school English who was like, I want to be a writer. So this was always on my heart from a very young age, but I didn't really know how to do this as sort of a vocation.
Okay.
Plus, I've been a college professor at my day job for a long time. By the time this airs, I will actually have transitioned out of that to do ghostwriting full time.
Congratulations.
Thanks. I appreciate that. So it's something that I always wanted to do, but I never really knew how to make this into a career. And honestly, I think being in the academic world probably worked against that business-minded nature to some degree.
Yeah.
Probably every educator listening is like, yes, I relate to that so much.
Yeah. We have a lot of conversations on this channel about exactly what higher ed does. Yeah.
I just actually had a conversation yesterday with a friend of mine who is an educator as well. We were talking about what can we do for educators to help them think more like business people, and to write, to have their own business more, to have their own content out there. That's a massive need that I see.
I completely agree. There's a little bit of a detour, but let's chase it just for a second.
Sure.
The other thing too is that the way that we're taught to write as academics makes no sense. And like to anyone else, and even like I've been reading sociology, like high sociological theory for a long time. And there's so many articles that I read and I'm just like, oh, you just want to sound important. Like this
exactly.
This isn't an actual idea that is functional for people. This is you doing publish or perish. And that's it. And so I completely agree. That's why we intentionally left higher ed, my partner and I, was the idea that we needed to take all these skills and these thought processes that we had been trained at and bring them to the marketplace, because ordinary humans, I'm using air quotes, need the thoughts and the thought process and the questions we're taught to ask and how we're taught to research much more than the self-perpetuating cycle of academia. So even from a not education perspective, but just as we were two PhD students who were looking at a career path in academia and went, no. And
I relate to that.
So, also there's the, I've become accustomed to eating, and you can't on adjunct salaries these days.
Yeah. Oh, that's a whole nother ball of wax, is how badly adjuncts are treated. in the higher ed system as a whole.
Yeah. So you were talking to this colleague and this friend about the need to bring like, and you teach English?
No, I teach communications
Communication.
at my
Okay.
school. That really this this is a weird story. So I used to actually teach music in kind of my former life to a degree. I was actually a pastor. Then I transitioned into teaching church music related courses. Then,
Okay.
to be totally honest with you, I just got really bored with that. It
That's
was
fair.
like,
I have a lot of church musician friends that got bored. I have a lot of ministry friends that got either burned out or bored and moved
yeah,
on.
it's a super common thing, and I often tell people in kind of the evangelical church world, there's a reason why you don't see many worship leader type people that are older than like 35 or 40 at the max.
Yeah,
The
especially
reason is
these days.
because it's really difficult on you emotionally to do that week after week after week.
It's a lot of
Um,
performance and pretending it's not.
oh, it's totally, and saying it's performance, it doesn't like delegitimize the value of it and the, however people perceive the spiritual value and stuff. But it's just, there's so much preparation and emotional energy that goes into it. It's just exhausting.
Yeah.
Um, so that's a whole nother ball of wax, but that's kind of where I came from. Then I transitioned into communications. So my academic dean a few years ago, I was transitioning out of that music role into something else, and he said, what do you want your new title to be? And I was like, oh, I didn't realize I got to pick that. So if I get to pick it, I'm going to call myself Professor of Communication Arts.
Oh, I love
And
it.
the reason that I said communication arts instead of communications is because if you say Professor of Communications, people normally associate that with journalism and those kind of things, which is
Yeah,
not really what I do. So I just said communication arts. I don't know if that's a real thing,
it
but
is
it's
now.
on my
You
business
spoke it into
card,
being.
so it is.
But that makes sense to me, and how you talk about the midwifery too, and how you talk about all this, that
Yeah.
like the art of communication is really what we need to teach folks. Like the nuts and bolts of journalism is really important. I'm not saying it's not, but in terms of, it sounds like you were at a liberal arts institution, and perhaps you weren't, but in terms of how we do liberal arts higher ed in the United States, we all need communication arts. Every
Yeah.
single student needs to be taught the art of how to communicate. And that's what you're doing for your clients. You are doing that work for them, but you're taking their story and shifting it into a way that people can understand it and
Yeah.
engage with it, which is an art.
Yeah. I do want to, if I can for a second, I'm going to go back to how I got into ghostwriting, because I think this
Please.
is an important thing. So the way, and because I really want to encourage educators that it is possible to develop a career doing this. I mean, I'm doing it. I've done it. I'm leaving my job to do this full time. So it is possible. If I can do it and begin to think more like a business person, then anybody can do it, because I'm like the least business minded person ever. But the way that I get into this was actually very intentional and strategic. So a couple of years ago, I had done multiple businesses. Like I had done fulfillment by Amazon. It's the kind of that deal where you like shipping books to Amazon and selling them. I spent a whole summer doing that, and it totally crashed and burned. It was a complete and utter failure. Not because of the system, but because I just didn't know what I was doing. I tried consulting. I actually got into network marketing for a bit, which was a massive failure for me because I didn't know what I was doing. So I had all these failures, and I was like, okay, if I'm going to build a business, I sit down and I made this is literally what I did. I made a list of what are the criteria that have to be in place for me in a business if I'm going to build it. And there were really 4 or 5 things. One was it needed to have unlimited income potential, but within, I'm not going to be like a billionaire overnight, but it had to be set up to where I could make as much as I wanted to, depending on my level of expertise, my skill set, connecting with the right clients, blah, blah, blah. So that had to be in place. I also wanted it to focus on writing, since that's my main marketable skill. It had to put me in touch with highly successful people. I had to be able to do it on my own time. Like I wanted to set my own schedule, and I wanted to be able to do it from anywhere. So with those criteria in mind, the only 2 things that I could find that met those 5 criteria were copywriting and ghostwriting.
Okay.
And I love copywriting, but the reason I chose ghostwriting is because I want to sink my energy into longer book projects rather than stuff like sales letters and web copy and things like that. As important as those are, that wasn't as interesting to me as ghostwriting. So that's literally how I get into it. I took a course by my friend Nick. Then I just started putting stuff into practice and had my first client a few months later.
I love it. I love the intentionality. I want folks to notice a couple things that Kent was really, really clear about exactly what he wanted. And I think when we're starting businesses, I talk to so many people that are starting things where their only thing is like, I just want to make money, or I need
Yeah.
to make money. And like, that's fine. Like, as I joked earlier, we've all become accustomed to eating. And so
Yeah,
money
we
is
like that.
important, but those other things in place were what really allowed you to create that career. Like, it had to have writing, it had to have all these
Yes.
kind of other things. And then you didn't take that list and then go, oh, but that, I understand it. It says I can only be a copywriter or a ghostwriter, but like, I still think I can make it work as this. Like, you
Yeah.
accepted the limitations the list gave
Yes.
you. And I think that's so important. Because when we talk about limitless potential, which most of us believe humans have on some level, like, that's a lovely phrase. But at some point in your life, you start to set appropriate limits on yourself. Like, hey, my dream can
Yeah.
grow super, super far as long as I prune it back to this list.
Yes.
And that's important to know.
And another big aspect in this was I've tried to have a long-term view with all this. So a few years ago, I could see, I mean, higher education has been in a very weird place for a while now,
A long time. Yep.
a long time. And everybody knows it's a declining industry, traditional higher ed. So I was seeing what was going on in my own heart in terms of like, I don't want to do music stuff anymore. It's kind of like killing me emotionally. And I just don't want to do it. So instead of quitting and going and working for Amazon or something, or just being unhappy, I decided to be really proactive. I work at a small school. So what I decided to do, this has been over the last number of years, is I would try to be really proactive about my teaching schedule and my courses. So instead of just, and anybody who's in higher ed knows the way it typically works is you get your course assignments and you just kind of accept those, and you're like, well, I'm teaching this and this and this, so this is my life for the next year or for the next semester. And I decided to not accept that anymore. So I started to basically play politics in a good way, meaning I would go to my academic dean and say, hey, what do you think about doing a course on, let's say, film or storytelling? What do you think about doing a course on self-publishing or podcasting? And I would sort of get some feedback, and then I would, because our whole faculty has to have input on because it's a small school, I would then go to people individually and get their input, so that whenever we made those decisions as faculty, I knew I was going to get a thumbs up. So I was kind of like the meeting before the meeting kind of a thing. And so I did that over a number of years. And eventually I basically created a new job for myself. At the same time, I began to overlap the ghostwriting stuff with the job. So I just tried to create job security for myself, because I could see where things were heading over the next few years. So it can be done. I think you just have to be intentional about it.
And that is a great place to, I'm going to be very honest, pause our conversation, because there is so much richness in your
Yeah.
life. There's so many other things we can talk about. But I'm going to hit pause here because I think that's a great place to wrap this particular video, is the idea that you can do a lot if you're intentional about it.
Yeah.
And we have a myth, especially in the United States, that like there's, if you just work really, really hard, well, you got to still work really hard in the right direction. And I think that the intentionality is the secret sauce that a lot of folks are missing. So Kent, thank you for sharing that, and for absolutely everything else. I'm going to make sure that all of your links so that folks can get a hold of you are in the show notes. So whenever you are experiencing this, whether it is in 2021 when we recorded this or in 2027, I don't know, all those links are still going to be there. Is there anything specific that you would like to share with the audience before we wrap up?
Yeah. If your audience is interested in writing, I would encourage them to check out my podcast, which is the Daily Writer Podcast. It's on iTunes and Spotify and all the places that podcasts are. Check that out. That's pretty much where you'll find everything else.
And it's a fantastic series of conversations about what writing looks like for so many people. And if you are somebody who is getting into writing, or just has ideas, or even says, well, I write like 45,000 emails a day, but I'm not a writer, you probably still are. And so
Exactly.
there's a whole lot of space within that word. It's not just Ernest Hemingway sitting on a boat somewhere. We can all kind of engage with the written word in a different way. So again, Thank you, Kent, so much for joining us. Everybody, if you have liked this video, make sure to like the video with the thumbs up button if you're on the YouTubes with me. Subscribe and hit the bell to make sure you don't miss any content. Here on the main Abby Research channel, we engage with empathy in terms of visual media and conversations with people. If you're into books like Kent and I are, make sure to hop over to our other channel, Abby Research Reads, where you get lots of content regarding books about empathy and inclusivity and equity. Hopefully some interviews with authors and some guest reviews as well, really trying to figure out how the books that we consume shape how we think about the world, just like everything else. So again, thanks everybody, and I'll see you next time on Welcome to My World. Bye.